cloud security. This is one of the really hot areas now, super high in demand, but very few people know how to do it. In this video, I'm going to show you how to get started setting up your own cloud environment in Microsoft Azure to learn the security side, whether you want to practice on the offensive or defensive side. And typically one of the go-to recommendations has been Pwn Labs. And I think this is a great resource. Check it out. It's already deployed for you, done for you, everything like that. But you definitely do lose a little bit of learning when you rely on something like this and you don't configure your own environment. So understanding the technology and how it's supposed to work is going to be really key. So without further ado, let's jump into the actual hands-on portion where I'm going to show you how to set up a vulnerable cloud lab environment without opening yourself up to being hacked, by the way, because the script that we're going to use is called Purple Cloud right here. If you go to purplecloud.network/install, you can read up on the installation instructions. And you can also go to these other pages here. You can see how to use the environment as well. There's multiple labs that you can deploy. I'm going to be deploying the Azure AD or Entra ID lab. And here are the prerequisites. So this was tested using this version of Python, using these versions here, but the latest up-to-date versions of Python and Terraform should work just fine. And I'm going to be using Ubuntu 20.04. I have that right here in a virtual machine. So let's just go ahead and create everything we need to create. The very first thing is that you need to create an account on portal.azure.com. I have already done that. And so will this cost any money? Well, technically, yes, but it's so little. If you apply what I'm going to teach you in this video, you can essentially do it for free. Your total expenditure is probably going to be less than $5 a month if you actually use these scripts to tear it down after you're done, which I'll show it. So stay tuned to the end of the video and you'll see how to do that. Now, the very first thing you're going to want to do after you create an account is to go to subscriptions, and we need to create a subscription. This is basically going to house all of our resources and stuff like that, everything with our environment. So click add here, and let's just give it a name. I'll just call this Elevate Cyber Test or something like that. Review and create. Validation check passed. Hit create here. And that will create our subscription that we'll use in a later step. So next, let's go over here back to our Ubuntu machine. And we are going to install some prerequisites. First of all, we're going to need to make sure that we have Azure CLI installed on Ubuntu. So we can do that in a single curl command using this command right here. I'll let you take a moment to take a look at that command. I'm going to run this, and that's going to install everything we need for Azure CLI, Azure CLI, that we're going to basically use to interact with Azure over the command line. This is going to be important for our install scripts that are going to be doing it and using this under the hood. So whenever you created your Azure account, just make a note of your tenant name, because that's what you're going to need potentially to authenticate using Azure CLI. Once that's installed, I will run this command here to authenticate Azure CLI, Azure login, tenant, and then my tenant name. And that's actually going to pop open a web browser that you're going to use to sign in to your Microsoft Azure account. And once it says you're signed in, you can go ahead and exit out of that. And now you should be about to authenticate here. If you have multiple subscriptions, it may ask you which subscription you're trying to authenticate with. I'm going to choose Elevate Cyber Test, which is number 1 here. Press 1 and press enter. And now we should be good to go on that front. We should be authenticated. So the next step is we need to clone the Purple Cloud repository. And by the way, if you want a written guide to accompany this video, just check out the purplecloud.network website. All the stuff that I'm going over with you here is listed in their installation guide, but just to make it easier, giving you the video walkthrough here. So we're going to go ahead and git clone this repository. And now if we cd into this directory, Purple Cloud, I'm going to now create a Python virtual environment because we're going to be running some scripts to populate our Terraform automated files that will allow us to basically automate deployment of the cloud. Now, to build those out, there's actually a Python script included with Purple Cloud. So first, I'm going to set up my virtual environment. So I'll say Python 3, tac m, v, env, and I'll just give it a name. I'll call it my env. And once I do that, there's one dependency that I need to install with pip inside this virtual environment called Faker. So I'm going to install that. And then once I do that, we're ready to activate this virtual environment with the source command. So now you'll see the prompt change here to whatever you named your virtual environment. And now you know that that is active. So the next step, the final dependency we need to install is actually Terraform, which is going to be what allows us to run these automated scripts. So in order to do that, we're going to actually go to the website of Terraform, and the install page will have a command that we can run as a one-liner to install this. So if you go here, and I'll put this in the description below so you guys can access this link here, just scroll down to Linux and make sure that Ubuntu/Debian is selected, and you can just hit this to copy this. These commands will install Terraform for you. And once that is complete, now we can actually deploy one of these lab environments. If we run an ls here, we can see this generators folder. This is where the labs actually live, and there's multiple of them. Check out the purplecloud.network site to see a detailed description of what all the different labs are, but just looking at the names, you can kind of get an idea. There's like a phishing app you can deploy, Sentinel, if you're a blue teamer, that would be a pretty good one, or the managed identity. There's like entire purple teaming and blue teaming labs that you can deploy if you're a defender and you want to level up on the Azure side. So I highly recommend to check out that guide and maybe consider deploying some of these other labs as well. Like I said, in this one, we're going to be looking at Azure AD, which is now named Entra ID by Microsoft. And yeah, we just see one Python file in here by default. Running this Python file is what's going to generate our Terraform files. If I refer to the guide, it'll show me what commands I need to run in order to set that up. And this is what can be a little confusing about the guide. It's actually on the next page when it goes into the Azure AD lab. So if we click over here, we can see this is the command that will generate it. Python 3 Azure AD.py tac upn. This is for the basic Azure AD lab. I'm actually going to go with a slightly more complex one that includes Azure applications and groups, just to have a more robust environment to play around with. So I'm going to actually run this command, though I am going to take the count out because I only want 100 users. I don't really need 500. So if I copy this command here, we can modify it. Now take note of this tac upn, rtcfingroup.com. That is actually what we're going to need to modify. We're going to need to change it into our domain that you can find. Like if you go to your Azure subscription, just click on your default directory up in the top right, and that will be the directory that you can use instead. But if we copy this command and we paste it in here, make sure that you cd into the Azure AD folder first. Now we can modify this command by removing this line here. And I'm going to put in my default directory. Once we do that, we have generated the Terraform files. And now we're actually ready to run these Terraform files to go ahead and automatically create all this stuff for us in Azure, in the cloud. So essentially, it's going to be your default directory .onmicrosoft.com by default. It's going to be something like that. So look for your default directory name and then add a .onmicrosoft.com. Press enter. That will generate the Terraform files. Now we can actually kick this off using Terraform. Run Terraform init. And it'll say it's successfully initialized. And then next we can generate a plan with Terraform plan. And we will do tac out equals run.plan. That's what it's going to name the file. And once that's generated, and this is, by the way, is the step where it's using Azure CLI under the hood. So make sure that if you haven't, before this, make sure that you have authenticated your Azure CLI. Otherwise, you're going to get an error at this step. So with that in place, we can go ahead and run a Terraform apply run.plan. And if we did everything correctly up to this point, it should be able to create these users. Now, keep in mind that this step actually is going to take a while because it's got to create 100 users, 5 groups, some applications, all this stuff specified in this script. So just give it some time. And when it completes, we'll check back in Azure Portal and see if we can identify those resources. And if that's the case, then we have set up our lab successfully and we can go from there. And once it's complete, you will see a message like this here, and it'll give you the password here. This is actually the credentials for all of the users. So you can actually authenticate to any of them and enumerate from their perspective. But the real power of this comes in the fact that this is a Azure account that you are the global administrator of. So this is the advantage of it over some of these other platforms out there, is you can actually see things from an admin's perspective. So you can come in here and start configuring this stuff and adding resources, giving special privileges to certain accounts and stuff like that. And you have your lab environment where you can have complete freedom to play around with stuff and look at it from both the admin perspective as well as the perspective of the adversary and trying to hack into stuff. We can see all of the users that it created, all 100 of them, plus one that I had already for my regular account. And then we can even browse around in some of the different areas in Entra ID. So we could get a summary here. There's 10 groups that were created as well. I think some of the groups I had from before, which is why we see more than 5 here. But we can click into that and see the groups that it created, and we can start enumerating around on stuff. You know, ideally you want to start enumerating and learning the command line as well, so you can play around with stuff like AZ PowerShell, AZ CLI, different things like that, or even the API calls. But once you've created this and you're done playing around with it for now, don't forget to tear it down, because otherwise it's going to be sitting there and it's going to be accruing cost. Now, like I said, if you tear this down whenever you're done, the cost is not going to be a lot, but it is easy to forget. So just make sure that before you sign off that you destroy it. And it's very simple to do that. You just simply run Terraform destroy. And this is going to take a little bit of time once again, because it's got to go and delete all of the resources that it created. And part of the way into this is going to prompt me to say, hey, are you sure you want to delete everything? You just need to type yes and hit enter. And then it will proceed to delete everything. I'd recommend to go back on Azure portal and verify that it's all deleted. But yeah, right here, just type yes, press enter, and just wait it out, and everything should be deleted. That's pretty much it for this video. I'll see you in the next one, and eventually we'll start playing around with this environment.